Hello Low4s and welcome to the second video this week where we are going to continue with our photo compositing tutorial, and we're going to make the line on our hands look a little bit more realistic. We already covered putting the line in. I've just decided now that I want to rotate it a little bit more, as I mentioned in the previous video, get it looking more upright. You can see there that the paws are now matching the angle of my hand, and I think that's good. And I think that's a good positioning for it. So if you take a look, you can see that the shadow on the lion's leg is pretty similar to the shadow from my fingers. But what I want to do is just adjust the color of the line. And if I start doing random things like that, you can see it doesn't work nicely. There, I'm fiddling around. Doesn't really look good. We need a better way to try and make it match the color of our our photograph better. And even there, you can see just doing random things really doesn't work. So we need to come up with a better method. Right. So the first, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new layer, and I will call this color matcher layer. It doesn't really matter what you call it. And what I'm going to do is I want to choose a value of gray. The way you get gray is by moving the color selector all the way to the left. As you go up and down, you can see you move from black to perfectly white. So we'll just choose a randomish gray color, so more gray than black, and we'll just flood fill it. And that covers everything up, which doesn't help us. So if we scroll all the way down and go to luminance, we can now see a comparison of the sort of like the different color values between the photograph that we have and the photograph that we're inserting, which is the line. And you can see there that the reds in the line are a lot less sort of duller than the ones in the photograph. So I'm increasing the red value, and I realize there I'm increasing it on the color matcher. So make sure you have the right layer, the pasted layer. That was just a little test to make sure I was on the right layer. And you can see over here, as we adjust the red up, you can see the sort of the colors in the red and the line are really starting to resemble the colors in the flowers. And it's not like the line's going to be red now. It's just that there's more red tones in the photograph that I have than in the lion. And there you can see, I think that looks like a much more natural, fits in with the colors of our graph, of our original photograph. And we can now delete that color matching layer. So that's a very nice trick that you can use to find the colors, to find a way to color match the colors. And you can obviously work with green, the greens and blues as well, but the line there is primarily the warmer red colors, so that was the only field that I worked with there. There you can see the next thing we want to work with is we need to get a little bit of a shadow on the hand, and we still need to get rid of that sort of like blue glow that I mentioned in the previous video. So I think what I do now is I take the eraser, and again, I want it to have I don't want a fully hard brush, so I've chosen a 50% soft brush. And then what I will do is I will sort of zoom in and get rid of those, although I'm still talking about the shadow because that's the very next thing we're going to do once we've got rid of those, is do that. And you can see there, we're going to want, it's a little bit tricky because we've got shadow on the line itself. It's going to be really tricky to, what's the word? Match the shadow. So I'm actually not getting rid of the halo yet. I am creating the shadow. So the first thing I do is I duplicate the layer. There I right-clicked, I chose duplicate layer, and then I've renamed the first layer to line, and the layer we just added to shadow. And you can see they're exact copies, whether I hide them or not. And so then what I want to do is I want to put a shadow in. So I go to filters, light and shadow, and I'm going to choose long shadow. And I think I messed this up initially. So the first thing I want to do is set the angle of the shadow to 0 and the length to 0. I changed the color of the shadow to black, and I missed a setting there. So you can see it hasn't changed anything. So I reopen the long shadow, and I want to choose only shadow. So I change that setting from shadow and image to only shadow, and you can see there when I hide the original line that my shadow is now just entirely like a shadow. In fact, all I've done is I've just created a completely black copy of the lion. And what I'm going to do is move the shadow underneath, but I decide, it's going to be easier to move around if it's on top for the time being. So while making sure I'm on the shadow layer, I'm going to choose the Unified Transform tool, which if you right-click, it's there at the top. And the Unified Transform allows you to do all of the rotating, scaling, and shearing in one go. So click on it, and you should see there it brings up Unified Transform. And then the first thing I do is I show you what you could do if you had. So if you wanted to change things, there are some constraints. I'm pointing out there with the Shift. If you hold Shift and Control, and the first one, I'm going to hold down Shift and drag that box down. And that would be if we had the sun up in the top and we wanted to move the shadow underneath the subject, which is not what we want to do here. If you don't hold Shift, it just scales it. So you can see there, it brings it down. You can reset to get it back to what you wanted. Here I'll show you what happens if we click without Shift. It just scales it down and it inverts it from left to right, which is absolutely not what we want from our shadow. So if you do have a very different sun angle, that is a tip you're going to need. So all I'm doing there is I'm shearing it a little bit, to get it more in the sort of going right, like our shadows are going. And I'm also going to make it a bit smaller, actually not terribly smaller, but a little bit smaller. And then I'm also going to play around with the perspective a little bit. I accidentally clicked rotate there, and there we go. That's our perspective. And what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and get it to match, firstly, the shadow angles that we have in our photograph, and secondly, you can see the shadow on the leg there. So I want to try and get it to sort of match that, and that's the way to get it looking the most sort of realistic. And so I'm literally just fiddling around here, and obviously you're going to have to come up with your own settings. And I moved the shadow layer down without clicking OK on the Unified Transform tool, which was incredibly silly. So I then messed around a little bit, just fiddling with layers. I think I had to move it back up, and I redid it off camera, and I got it back to where it looked good. I think I forgot to scale it down this time, and I think I really should have scaled it down a little bit. Although, you might actually want it much longer. And then I'm just taking the opacity down from 100%. I think I take it to 90%, and that's what gives you the sort of the shadow effect, where you can see like the region on my hand just looks a little bit darker. And then I wanted to do a Gaussian blur, because our shadow is never going to be like perfectly crisp. And I'm just adjusting the size to get a nice blur there. And then I'm going to, move the shadow around into the right place. And then I think I should have scaled it a little bit more, to make the feet match up, but I think it's fine. But obviously that shadow there should not be happening. So I'm going to add a layer mask to my shadow layer, and then all I do is I choose a black color, and I choose a perfectly hard brush because I want to get rid of everything. I don't want to, little bits, and then I just get rid of the shadow where there shouldn't be shadow. And that looks quite good. I've got rid of the shadow there, and I think I now have a much better one than my first attempt, and that's primarily because of the angle. And I can now export this as a JPEG and have my lion jumping out of my hand.